Welcome to the No Godcast. It's an atheist talk show about a lot more than you'd expect. So sit back, get real comfortable in those headphones, and relax. We'll take it from here.
If anyone thinks it's a question I answered poorly, or inadequately, or badly, or failed to answer at all, and would like to challenge me, I'd happily give them 5 minutes.
Perhaps our descendants will regard our present ignorance with as much sympathy as we feel to the ancients for not knowing whether the earth went around the sun.
Those of us who come from the evangelical subculture have been weaned with our mother's milk on a changing cast list of villains.
Let us fight to free the world, to do away with national barriers, to do away with greed, with hate and intolerance. Let us fight for a world of reason, a world where science and progress will lead to all men's happiness.
Hello and welcome to episode 32 of the No Godcast. This week we feature our first installment of Dr. Daryl Ray's new bi-monthly segment on secular sex and sexuality. You can catch that smack dab in the middle of tonight's interview as we pause for an intermission. Our guest tonight is American philosophy instructor, author, speaker, as well as speaker for the Richard Dawkins Foundation of Reason and Science, and he's published extensively across multiple domains of thought. Peter Boghossian. Peter, welcome to the program.
My pleasure. Thank you so much for having me.
So Peter, as mentioned a moment ago, is a philosophy instructor at Portland State University. His primary research areas are in critical thinking and moral reasoning. His new book, A Manual for Creating Atheists, concerns both and seeks to raise a formidable army of what he calls street epistemologists in order to disabuse people of their faith. Faith, as he puts it, is an unreliable epistemology and is better left behind as we mature as social primates. So tonight we're going to learn a little bit about Mr. Boghossian, where he's from, how he's gotten to where he is today, and about his book and the practice of street epistemology. So the basics. What is street epistemology, and what influenced you to create the practice and write the book? And there's so much Socratic method in it that certainly the Greek master must have influenced you a great deal. But what I mean is, I don't mean to ask what is it that gave you the wherewithal, but rather what gave you the passion?
Well, so to answer the first part of your question, epistemology is just a $2 word for how one knows what one knows, a study of knowledge, basically, oversimplified, basically. And the idea of street epistemology is you want to take it out of the academy and you want to bring it to the streets, to the prisons. I've taught in prisons extensively. You want to have been involved in the prisons extensively, and taught in the prisons, but you want to bring these ideas to people at all walks of life that are people who are outside of the academy. So how do you do that is the question, and why should you do that is another reasonable question. But the reason that I did this, I started this, is because I came to the quite obvious conclusion that I was uniquely situated. I could ask basically anybody in my critical thinking and my ethics classes about any questions that I wanted to regarding the subject. So I would ask people about their ideas they had in their moral lives, and then I would situate that in the larger context of the history of Western intellectual thought or particularly ethical theory. And I came to realize over the years, and one of the reasons my colleagues don't like to teach the class is because people have what my ex-boss called this knee-jerk absolutism. They just think they know the answers, et cetera, et cetera. But I came to realize that people don't have good reasons for the things they believe. And the problem isn't that they have a particular conclusion, like about gay marriage or circumcision, as I heard your thing about Daryl Ray in the beginning. The problem isn't that. The problem is that they have ways to know those things that won't lead them to the truth. So they think that the ways that they're conceptualizing problems are good ways and helpful ways and useful ways, but they're not. They're actually ways that are taking them away from the truth. So part of my research area has been how to teach these concepts to people, so that how to teach philosophy, how to teach critical thinking, how to teach moral reasoning. And I just think that isn't. We are at a crossroads, at a turning point right now, in which it is essential that people are given these basic tools for how to differentiate reality from make-believe land.
So from what I get from the book, and I hope this is what everybody gets from the book, is that essentially, and having heard what you just said, street epistemology is the practice of being being ready at all times, for all intents and purposes, on the street, to talk people out of their faith-based epistemologies. And that's actually, it's quite intense. I mean, it's one thing to debate or convince people over the internet. You know, you're kind of tucked safely behind your keyboard and your PJs or your Snuggie or what have you. But it's quite another to have that same veracity and cleverness in real-life conversation. I mean, you've got to be quick. You got to know what you're doing. If you falter, maybe you won't be as effective, or maybe you'll help somebody get further dug into their bad epistemology. So you've got years of teaching and working in the prison system and at university. I mean, how can this book get you to that level of effectiveness? Is it years of study? Do I have to read this book 100 times?
No, it's what it is honesty with yourself. It's sincerity. I just listened to Carl Sagan's interview on NPR, an old interview, and it was really interesting how he talked about all the kids in his class have a sense of wonder, but that sense of wonder gets closed off. He said that they don't quite rise to the level of skeptics, but they get closed off. Every religious tradition has a corpus of literature, or virtually everyone, as far as I know, how to talk people into faith. But amazingly, no one's ever written anything for how to talk people out of faith. I don't think it's that one necessarily has to be quick, although certainly being quick helps. I don't think that one necessarily has to be particularly intelligent, although of course that helps, or educated. One just has to be sincere and honest about how people come to know things, and one has to be sincere about what certain words mean and why people use those words as opposed to other words. And I think if somebody approaches those conversations with sincerity, then the other thing that could happen is you approach these conversations, you have a real, genuine interaction with people, and you find out that they know something that you don't know, and then you change your mind. So even in that situation, it's a win-win for everybody. The discourse is increasingly polarized and less civil, and I think we need to call for more civility.
I could agree with that.
Yeah, that's why, just parenthetically, I was so disappointed, and I really like Dan Dennett. I truly do. I was so disappointed by his caustic, acerbic attack on Sam Harris. I don't know. Did you read that?
No, I didn't. But I read something by Harris recently that made me think they had exchanged some sort of words that weren't necessarily positive.
Yeah, he wrote a response to that, and one of your former guests. I just think there has been a lack of civility among all parties, and it's not just the discourse between the faithful and atheists or agnostics or skeptics or humanists or free thinkers, however you want to frame that. I think we need more civility in our discourse. I mean, Dan could have easily published a matter-of-fact essay about why he thought Sam was wrong. He chose not to do that, and it seemed like a very personal attack, which frankly for Dan seemed to me to be beneath him. But anyway, that's neither here nor there. The idea is that it's not a question of us or them. It's a question of we need to be more honest and sincere and more respectful of people, not their ideas, but of people when we engage in these conversations. And the discourse is so polarized, and people call each other nasty words and, a museum of mistakes or whatever it has you, whatever phrase one wants to use. And there's simply no reason for that. That's uncalled for.
Why do you suppose that is? I mean, is that some kind of, you're protecting a dogmatic belief one way or another? I mean, why are people getting, why does Dennett get so protective? Why did he respond so personally? I mean, I'm not asking you to speak for him, but what do you think? Why do you think that happened?
I don't have the faintest clue. I really don't know. I don't know why. I don't know. I don't have any idea. I will say, when I've spoken to my elders, when I've spoken to my mentor, who's 95, about how uncivil it's become, I'm 47 now, and when I look back on how our political discourse evolved, I remember it being polarized, Soviet Union and differences of opinion, but I never remember it being as uncivil. And that's bad for a number of reasons, but one thing it does is it prevents genuine discourse from occurring. When two people are making ad hominem attacks on each other, or they're attacking people and not their ideas, we don't further the discourse. We don't come to, as Habermas says, a mutual understanding that way. And at the very least, the purpose of these conversations and discussions, and you used the word debate before, I don't think that these things should be a debate, and I think that conceptualizing them as a debate is wrong. Again, that Habermasian framework, he's a German philosopher, is that you seek a mutual understanding with people. Which, again, just as an aside, so I listen to, I do this stuff constantly. I was at the gym. I used to listen to music a few years ago at the gym, but now I started listening to lectures on faith. And I got to tell you, all the lectures that Christians post on their page say Peter Boghossian needs to listen to this, or, why isn't Dr. Boghossian listening to this? I actually do listen to a lot of those. And I got to tell you, maybe I'm completely missing something, but I don't think so. I just listened to Alistair McGrath, the guy with the very British accent, and I listened to what's that other guy, John Lennox, and I listened. So I listened to these, and I think wow, it really could be that I'm just not getting something like that. These people, they just see something that I don't see, and I listen to it with a total sincerity, and I have to say to myself, it just does not seem to me that these positions seem intrinsically, outside the bounds of rationality, and they're trying to use reason to promote these ideas, or to proselytize, or to get people on board. And I think one of the reasons for the incivility could be that they're trying to use reason to advocate for an unreasonable position. And the problem with this is when you hold a belief and you don't have enough evidence for it, you have to make up that slack somehow. Maybe that slack is by faith. Maybe that slack is by blasphemy laws. Maybe that slack is by being offended. I just published a piece about an appeal to sanctity, or just some kind of fallacious way of thinking, or being offended. I don't really know, but I'd like to issue a call to change that in civility.
I mean, as somebody I started this podcast on Twitter, as you may or may not know, and I mean, I see a lot of that, a lot of atheists going after each other, atheists going after creationists going after atheists, and I think maybe some of it has to do with, we live in a time where you can instantaneously communicate with anybody, and you don't have to think about it anymore. You don't have to think about, how is this going to make me look? What's the ramification? Because you've got that real quick access to them. So, I mean, it used to be you had to write a letter, and you had to write it, Right. Even if you had typewriters, you had to type it, and you had to read it, and you said, well, maybe this isn't the best. You got that minute to cool down, and now you don't have that minute anymore.
Yeah, it could be that it's a function of technology, and that causes it. It could be that it's I really don't know why. I don't know why. I don't even think I'm definitely not qualified to give a genealogical account of how we came to be in this predicament, but I think I'm somewhat well suited to offer an alternative suggestion. And one of the things that I've started doing in my public lectures is giving extended Q&As. So I used to give 20 to 30 minute talk. I can tell you why that number is special, and then I used to give a 20 to 30 minute Q&A. When I was in Abbotsford, I gave a 90-minute Q&A, and unfortunately, I think something happened to the audio. It was a wonderful Q&A. A lot of Christians came and asked great questions, and I think that we need to somehow model that behavior for people. I keep using the word civility, but it really is the best word to use, of being more respectful of the person, not interrupting, listening when we have these conversations. And street epistemology, and that's one of the things I hope that my book does, is it's a call back to this, to not use invectives, to not get nasty with people, but to sincerely try to figure out why people believe what they believe, and guide them. There are templates in the book to guide them through ways of conceptualizing problems that are better than the ways they're currently using. Or maybe they're currently using a better way to conceptualize the problem. It just, again, another aside, that's what Jonathan Haidt's criticism of the New Atheist was. I don't know if you read that piece.
I did.
Yeah, so I'm currently writing about that with James Lindsay. When to use certainty words. When are the use of certainty words okay? And what does it mean to say I'm justified in holding a belief? I think these are really important claims. And again, maybe it's at some level people realize that they're not justified in holding that the beliefs that they hold. And to make up for that, they have to be angry or they have to be uncivil. But it's even worse, really, frankly, if we need to turn that same mirror on ourselves. I mean, the atheist community has been really torn asunder.
That's one way to put it. You mentioned James Lindsay. We've got him lined up for an interview sometime this week. He's author of a couple of really good books and ... most recently.
Can't recommend him highly enough.
Yeah.
Everybody should follow him on Twitter. Read his books.
And do so at God Doesn't, by the way. God Doesn't. So a lot of people might ask, why Peter Boghossian? I'm wondering, I'm not going to ask you why, because I think you are. After listening to the book, because I listened to it on audiobook, which I suggest everyone can do through audible.com. I don't remember you talking too much about what you did in the prisons, and I guess I'm kind of interested in what you did do there and how big a part that had in getting to where you are. I mean, you must have seen some, for lack of a better phrase, crazy shit.
Yeah. So I just want to say I don't necessarily. I struggle with that idea of thinking that I'm the guy. I don't know if there's the guy for anything. Excuse me. I think that I'm situated. I do think I'm uniquely situated to advocate for some of these ideas. But I think that has less to do with me and more so to do with the timeliness and the importance of the ideas. I think a lot of people could have written this book or could have done some of the things that I've done, and I really do hope at some point in the future that the book becomes obsolete, either because we've eradicated the faith virus or that somebody's come out with, a manual for creating Atheist 2.0. So the prison experience was fascinating. I did it for my doctoral work and then taught in the prisons, and then subsequent to that served on the prison advisory committee and have been involved with prisons and community work with prisons and started internships at a local prison up here, Columbia River Correctional Institution. And I think it was a fascinating opportunity for me to really delve into the literature, the interdisciplinary literature, the cross-disciplinary literature, psychology, corrections, philosophy, pedagogy, education. And many of the people in prisons, it's really a fascinating group of individuals who, in this case I'll say men because I've never worked with women, because they're all men at this facility. And many of these folks either don't want their behavior changed or don't think they have a problem. And there's a line of literature in cognitive behavioral therapy about how to help change the behavior of people who don't want their behavior changed. And it basically starts with changing, grossly oversimplified, but starts with changing the cognitions and the way people conceptualize ideas. And then that bleeds through or manifests itself in their actions. And so those conversations, and I published many of them, and I have others that I haven't published, they're incredibly raw, they're real, they're not mediated by political correctness, nobody's BSing you, people are saying exactly what they mean, no one's obfuscating. I found them to be honest and sincere and real, and especially good because I wasn't assigning grades to anybody, and I had a little volunteer badge as well. And the volunteer badge really protects you in a way that I never thought it would, because you're not a member of the administration. You're not we don't call them guards in Oregon, but you're not staff. So they know that you're there they know that you're giving your time. And usually the people who give their time are religious fundamentalists of some sort, and they want to proselytize.
Sure. We've got a question from one of our listeners via Twitter. He can be followed at secularlad, spelled just like it sounds. He asks, during a treatment, which is what you call these conversations or treatments, how should we treat married couples? Should we treat them as a pair or as individuals? I'm asking because if we deconvert a spouse, we may break up a marriage. Should this be considered?
That's a tricky question. I don't know the answer to the first part of the question. The best answer that I can give is that it's a really good question. It depends on the context for how you should treat a married couple. I mean, do you deliver the intervention to them at dinner? Do you deliver do you only work with a guy at work who happens to have caught the faith virus? You're not around his wife. I mean, it's a difficult question because I don't know the context in which the intervention would take place. Ideally, what would happen is that if you could help somebody shed the faith virus, if you could inoculate them or get rid of it for one person, then they could help their spouse. So I don't necessarily think it should be conceptualized in terms of breaking up a marriage, but in terms of one person helping another person.
Well, and let me just—it's not devil's advocate or anything, but
that's fine.
Even
if it is, that's fine.
Let me take this to what I think Secular Lad may be worried about is what if what if you are dealing with only one of them, and let's say you only have access to one of them, and you are able to help them, as you said, shed their faith virus or overcome it, and it results in a divorce. Should you feel guilty?
You should never feel guilty for helping someone to have more reliable epistemology. I mean, the only thing that could be said in that context is maybe that you didn't do enough for the spouse. So no, I mean, if somebody is suffering from something, if somebody has a way to know the world, I mean, just think about that in terms of a church. If you bring a few people out of the church because you are the mosque or the synagogue or the temple, it's certainly not just about Christianity or about Christianity specifically. If you bring a few people out of the church and that weakens the church, I'm not sure this analogy is perfect, but it's not. That's with the idea of a church, it's a positive thing. With the idea of a marriage, look, nobody wants to break somebody else's marriage up. But if the marriage is based upon a delusion, right? If the marriage is based upon, looking at my son's lamp of Godzilla here, like a Shintoism or something, if the marriage is based upon something that's not real, if it's illusory, then there might have not been something that was holding it together except for that illusion in the first place. So, no, I don't think one should ever feel bad or guilty about helping somebody develop a more reliable or a method of understanding reality that they can rely upon that will make it more likely that they can align their beliefs with reality.
Without sounding like I'm hitting on you, can we do a little bit of role playing?
Yeah, I mean, you could hit on me all you want; it wouldn't work. Sure, great. Go right ahead.
I'll be the faithful, and you be the street epistemologist. So
how about I just be me?
Okay. Yeah. Well, you be yourself. There we go. I believe there's a God, and I believe He created the heavens and the earth in 6 literal days. I therefore believe that evolution is untrue, and I advocate the teachings of creationism in the classroom. I vote with this in mind. You
really put everything in there.
I did. I'm a fan of Ray Comfort. You're sitting next to me in a friendly neighborhood bar, and you overhear me say, in response to something on the television, "This evolution, what a scam. The good Lord created the world in 6 days, and the world is less than 10,000 years old, and that's what I know, and that's what I teach my kids." And I turn to you and I say, "Am I right or am I right?" How do you respond?
All right. Well, how many drinks have I had?
We were just having lunch, maybe 1 beer.
All right. Well, I don't drink in the day, but okay. So we're having lunch. He turns to me. We're watching something about creationism. You really did make sure you packed the whole thing in there. So the good thing about what you said was that I no longer need to. I can skip a couple of parts of the intervention. One of the parts I can skip is the ability to ascertain where they are in their level of closure. So this person is extremely confident, and you use the word literal, and so that tells me a number of things as well. And also from the words that you used, I can skip over some of the parts. The problem is almost never does anybody say that to you. So the problem when someone just directly engages you like that is that you miss the beginning part of the intervention, which is the rapport building. And when you miss the rapport building, then it's more likely for the conversation to turn south or what have you. So in those circumstances, you have to kind of take a step back and attempt to rebuild it. So the first thing I would do is I would put my fork down and I would say, "Hey, my name's Peter, and that's a great question, and I'd love to talk about that. What's your name?" So at least some way we have some rapport, so you can address someone by their first name. So I would try to spend some time in that context, getting to know the person. Again, I understand I was asked a direct question. I'll give you a direct answer.
No. You're doing exactly what is good. That's good. That's fine.
Yeah. So you'd have to do that for some of it, and then the next question that you would ask is, So they threw out a number of different things, teaching it in their schools. They talked about evolution. They talked about 6 days. Those things are not the same. They talked about the Jesus Christ. So the age. I mean, they talked about a lot of things, and you can't target any of those propositions in mass. It's not this cluster that comes to you. You've got to tease those out. So the first thing that I would ask, I would want to make sure that I'm on the same page with this person. So I'd say, well, what do you mean by that? So I'd say, for example, 10,000 years old. Like, I'd figure out kind of based upon what my mood was, where I would want the conversation to go. Would I want it to go towards biology? As I mentioned to you off air, I just listened to Jerry Coyne's podcast, and so I've been thinking a lot about evolution and creationism, especially in the Bill Nye thing. So I might target that. If not, and that's that same interview by Jerry, by the way, he talks about how what we know about carbon dating and how carbon dating is effective. So anyway, it would depend on what I was thinking about. I would never want to engage that person in a way that was insincere. In other words, I wouldn't want to just talk about something that I myself wasn't interested at that time. So maybe I'd talk about biology. So I'd say, well, what do you mean by evolution? What does that mean to you? Could you explain that to me? And the words that I used there were key. Could you explain that to me so he doesn't feel threatened, the defensive posture isn't invoked, and then you can listen to the explanation that they give. I personally wouldn't move on to other things like the age of the earth or whatever. I would or teaching it in schools or institutionalizing it, I would specifically stick to one claim and then target that claim, and then based upon his responses, I would respond by making sure, since I missed the rapport building, that I always said his name after that.
Well, I mean, you hint at a good point. You can't solve everything in one sitting. You can't hope to completely cleanse somebody of their faith disease in one conversation, right? I mean, I'm sure taking somebody, depending on how entrenched they are in their faith, it must take multiple sessions of having these sorts of discussions. You're not going to have somebody at a bar.
It does, but no, you're. I interrupted. I'm sorry.
No. Go ahead. That's fine.
No, you're right. I mean, it does. In this context, I'd be very surprised if within 7 to 10 minutes you couldn't bring him down one notch in the trans-theoretical model. I'd be very surprised if you couldn't instill genuine doubt about certain ideas that he has, certain ways that he conceptualizes the framework of evolution. I'd be very surprised if you actually followed the template in the book, that if you were not able to do that, then there's something really wrong. I mean, maybe that person has a radical form of doxastic closure, or maybe the street epistemologist varied from the template in the book, or maybe you didn't spend enough time attempting to build the rapport. So something was wrong. You should be able to do it. I mean, almost never does it happen where that's not the case.
So that was a wild example, right? I threw in creationism and all this stuff. It was ridiculous. But what's a more common example of meeting somebody on the street, for all intents and purposes? I mean, wherever that might be. What's a more common interaction you might have?
Oh, you'll be talking about something totally unrelated to anything, and you'll just be just like when people meet on the street and they'll be talking, and then something will come up. Somebody went to mosque. Somebody has a bar mitzvah to go to, what have you. And then, so it will come up holistically in the context of a conversation. And so the rapport buildings are already done. And then what you need to do in that sense, in the other intervention, you already knew their state of closure. And on that, in the book, I talk about the trans-theoretical model. You knew that they were pre-contemplative. So you're just trying to move them one stage to contemplative about a particular belief. And ideally, it would be about the whole set of belief and the very foundation, the structure of belief itself. But in those conversations, those are much easier. The only thing you need to do is someone mentions something. You want to do something? I can't. I'm going to church this Sunday. Oh, that's interesting. What church do you go to? Oh, how long you've been there? Why do you like it? What's attractive to you about that church? And one of the things you'll find is that if you're sincere and you really want to know those questions, people would love to talk to you about that. Nothing would make them more happy. They want you to share in their delusion as well. So when you're coming up with this in the context, then not only is that more rapport building, but you can get a genuine idea of what it is, what they believe, and then you can start honing in on why they believe what they believe. And those conversations, in general, even though it was artificial, the conversation that you gave, those definitely happen. They just don't happen as frequently.
You make a lot of. You mentioned this a lot in the book, anyway. Attack faith, not religion. Faith is the foundation of the house. Religion is the other support structures,
right?
The mid beams and things like that. Why is that so important? Is there some rapport involved in that? I mean, what makes that so important that you attack the faith and not the religion?
Oh, it's indispensable. It's indispensable. I mean, it's vital because you asked the previous question. You said to me, let's talk about how those interact. What do they look like? Mm-hmm. So let's say that the person says to you, like here, my dad would be a great example of this. My dad is an atheist, although he wouldn't say he's an atheist out loud because he still has that stigma of that generation.
Sure.
But he goes to Armenian church. He loves to sing. My dad's, when we lost my mom, my dad's been reaching out for community resources and things, and the choir, and he speaks Armenian, the choir has been a fantastic outlet for him. But he doesn't buy into any of those superstitions. So for my dad, going to church and being a member of the choir is not bundled with pretending to know things he doesn't know or thinking people raised from tombs or any of the silliness. But it is bundled with a sense of community, and you don't want to attack community or the way people feel about their friends, but you want to attack how it is that they know something. Oh, you think this? Well, why do you think that? Oh, you think that the witness of the Holy Spirit lives in your heart. Oh, well, tell me about that. What do you mean by that? Why do you have confidence that that's true? How do you know that your confidence is warranted? Oh, I just know. And so once you figure out that, not only can you target the intervention more appropriately, but often when I hear a criticism, the criticism comes from Christians, and I personally think that their attack on my work is unfair because they seem to think that I've targeted Christianity. That is just false. It is absolutely positively false. I am completely against all faith, and I do not target Christianity or Islam or any one faith any more than the others. Now, it's certainly true that I live in the United States, and there happen to be more Christians here than Hindus,
right.
And so I'm more likely to have an intervention with somebody on the street who's a Christian as opposed to a Hindu. But I don't think those criticisms are justified. So get back to your point. It's important to, or your question, it's important to target faith because what you want to do is you're not trying to separate people from communities, although these communities propagate faulty epistemologies. You're trying to help people learn to reason. And many of the people think that they're reasoning, but they're not reasoning. Or if someone has had some apologetics training, which is basically, defense of the faith, from 1 Peter 3:15. This it's not apologizing for the faith, but if people have had apologetics training, those are just exercises in confirmation bias. Those individuals are not sincere seekers of truth. They really want to win an argument or to get a point across or to prove something to themselves. So those right from the get-go, those conversations aren't sincere. So you're not talking about separating someone from their community or the activities. I would never want to separate my dad from the fact that he sings in the choir.
Well, anybody who's read the book knows that there's a story you bring up in somewhere in the closer to the middle, maybe close to the beginning, when you're talking about, you just said, it's not any particular faith, it's just faith in general. And yeah. One of the stories you tell is a conversation you have with a young lady who is an alternative health doctor.
Oh, yeah, this is
acupuncture. Yeah. Acupuncture. So just for the benefits of our listener, you want to tell that story and why disabusing someone of that sort of faith is just as useful or just as important as disabusing them of an ecclesiastic faith.
Yeah, that's a great question. The book is really about epistemology, how you know, and I'll be frank with you, I wanted to title the book Street Epistemology, and everybody freaked out at me. They said, if you title it, nobody is going to buy a book with the word epistemology. Nobody even knows what epistemology is. It's a terrible idea. And I'm sure they were right about that to some extent. But faulty epistemologies or bad ways of thinking are the problem. They happen to be more conspicuous in certain domains of thought. They happen to be more conspicuous in terms of faith or different types of faith. Part of the problem is, Michael Shermer said to me, the videos online, he thinks the biggest, where skepticism is needed most is actually, and this surprised me somewhat, is not in religion, but it's with alternative medicine. Because in alternative medicine, you have a genuine harm in which people are actually dying. By the way, he gave a talk at TAM. He's spoken in my class. If you want to see somebody who really does a number on acupuncture, Dr. Mark Crisplis, he runs a website online. It's like Quack Watch or something like that. I can't remember the name of it. But I would defy anybody he's a board-certified physician in infectious disease. I would defy anybody to sit through that 2-hour lecture and then go to a acupuncturist. So it is important. There's nothing special about the faulty epistemologies of religion. They're still making claims. There's still a difference between the confidence one should have in the belief based upon evidence and the confidence one does have in the belief. The same thing is true of alternative medicine. I will say that I've recently come to a change in my thought over the past 4 or 5 years from thinking about this and reading about it so much. I do think that the woman with whom I spoke was sincere. I do think that she bought into her own delusion. Part of it is that these people who come to them are self-selected, and they think that they're getting better, and they think that the treatment does something, and then the person who's administering the treatment then thinks that they actually know what they're doing. In other words, it increases everybody's mutually partaking of this delusion. It's like, I talk about this in my science and pseudoscience class where Matt Thornton comes in and does a guest lecture. It's like those guys who believe you can knock people out without touching them. Have you seen those videos in martial arts?
Yeah. They get really close to him in some way and use an energy. They knock him out with an energy.
It's just the most completely ridiculous thing. But disabusing someone of that, we could triage this, or we could make some kind of hierarchical. We could have some criteria to invoke to discern which is the more immediate problem. I have chosen to attack the faith virus in terms of religion because I do think that that's a problem that needs our immediate concern. But you could just as easily do this with anything else, alternative medicine or martial arts or what have you. Martial arts is easier. It's easier because you can just take these guys of similar weight and you could just throw them in a cage, and you have to set some rules. You can't have people gouging their eyes out or biting each other's groins off, but you set some basic rules and you close the cage, and that's the way you adjudicate which skill is better.
We're going to take a break and listen to Daryl Ray talk about secular sex and sexuality, and we'll be back with author Peter Boghossian in just a few minutes.
Adventures in Secular Sexuality, number 1. Hello, I'm Daryl Ray, author of The God Virus and Sex and God, How Religion Distorts Sexuality. Today I want to talk about the concept of secular sexuality. Sexuality is a cultural construct that changes with time and across cultures. Yet in any given culture, that culture will probably believe that their view of sexuality is natural and unchanging. Muslims claim Islamic sexuality is cast in stone and was by Muhammad himself. Christians say their sexuality was created by their God and Jesus put the finishing touches on it. Of course, these claims are easily debunked by simply reading their holy books, where Muhammad had 19 wives and concubines. You don't think you see that in too many Muslims right now. Jesus supposedly never married, and Paul claims to be celibate. Both seem to claim that sex itself is a bad idea, and the less the better. That view doesn't seem to comport with how Baptists view sex today. Several early Mormon prophets claim that their Jesus was married and polygamous. I'm inclined to think they have a point, if he existed at all. They say he was married and had 3 wives. It's not far-fetched, since polygamy was legal in Judaism until the 1100s, and was certainly practiced in the 1st century CE. Herod himself had 15 wives. In other areas, views on homosexuality vary widely among cultures. Ancient Greece had very specific traditions that ruled the expression of homosexuality. The Na culture in China has an extremely different view of female sexuality than we have in the West. Pre-contact Hawaii treated sexuality like we treat food, with almost no restrictions. At the same time, they treated food like we treat sex, with strict rules and punishments. How is this important to us today? We're in a time and place where the strictures of culture and religion can be more easily challenged. We can see how sexuality has changed and evolved through history and recognize that there's no such thing as one specific kind of sexuality. As secular sexuals, we can examine sexuality outside of the myths and traditions of the past. We can ask, what does it mean to be a sexual person? Without having to filter it through the lens of Islam or Christianity, Hinduism or Mormonism. It is liberating and scary at the same time. Being a secular sexual means you have a lot of choices to make. You have responsibilities to yourself and others that are not automatically guided by a holy book, a priest, or an imam. If you left religion at one point, you found that there were many ideas in your religious training that were just plain wrong. You also learned that you no longer had religious structure around you to help you guide you and help you make your decisions. You had to take responsibility for yourself. You had to learn what ethical behavior is for you and challenge assumptions and ideas about right and wrong that you learned from childhood. Same is true of your sexuality. Being a secular sexual means you have to learn what ethical behavior is and how you express your sexuality to others, and respect their wishes, desires, and feelings, even if they're different from your own. It is also an opportunity to explore and understand yourself and others as no Christian or Muslim can do. You aren't going to hell for having sex outside of marriage. There's no eternal punishment for masturbating, no judgment for loving someone of the same sex. No matter your age or experience, there's probably more to learn about yourself and others. Even if you're not sexually active, you're asexual, or just no longer interested in sex, you're still in constant contact with others who are sexual. Learning how to accept them, understand, and learn from them is still a challenge for all of us. We live in a wonderful and scary time. It is wonderful that we're no longer tied to sexual dogma that is thousands of years old. It is scary that we may now encounter sexualities that are unfamiliar to us or go against deeply embedded ideas about what is and isn't right. I want to challenge every secular person to use a rational approach to sexuality, to listen, read, and explore in a way that expands understanding, empathy, and knowledge. In my experience, there's much more to be gained by understanding and accepting than by judgment. Humans are an incredibly sexual species, far more than most other species. Let's learn about and appreciate our sexuality. It can have many benefits in and outside the bedroom.
You're listening to the No Godcast, a production of Secular Programming and the Secular Broadcasting Network. If you'd like to support the show, as well as all the other great programs on the SBN, head on over to patreon.com/SecularFM and become a patron. Thanks for the support.
We're back with author of A Manual for Creating Atheists, Peter Boghossian. Peter, what do you think about the Nye-Ken Ham debate that just happened?
I was against the debate taking place and co-published something on the Dawkins Foundation website about it. I think it, and I agreed with Dan Ariel, it lended an air of credibility to a position that ought not to have any credibility. That debate was settled long ago, so I was opposed to the debate.
What do you think of people that? What do you think of the opinion that, well, if he could change the mind of one person in that room, then it would have been worth it?
Well, the problem is, I mean, that's a utilitarian calculus. In other words, you look at how many people are positively affected and how many people are negatively affected. The problem is that the calculus isn't that simple, precisely because people at some level of the back of their mind would have that in the future. They would think that there's something to debate. There is nothing to debate. The debate is settled. There is no debate. So I don't think it's so simplistic as, well, if it changed the mind of one person, because people would say, well, look, they're still debating it. I read something a while ago where somebody argued that one of the reasons that tobacco companies up until a decade ago published or funded so much research is that not because they didn't know, I don't mean to sound conspiratorial about it, but not because they didn't know cigarettes weren't harmful, but they wanted to give the impression that, look at this, where more research needs to be done, and we need to figure this out, and there's a controversy, we're not so sure. Creationism is an extreme form of silliness that ought to be given no countenance.
I don't disagree with you. I think the only reason that I liked watching that debate was you got to watch Bill Nye make Ken Ham look like he was an idiot. And I had a guilty pleasure in watching that.
Yeah, I mean, I did not have any, I did not get that feeling. I got the distinct impression that if I were sitting there looking at it, because when you look at the quote unquote exit polls, the people who came out of it afterwards, when you look at it on the ground, when you look at it online, a lot of Christians said that the debate went to Bill Nye. And then a lot of Christians have, and I tweeted some Christian sites, I'm going to be on his podcast, the VeggieTales guy, Phil, I can't remember, Vishner, I can't remember his last name. Nice guy. I've been having a very civil, cordial email correspondence, and I actually really like him. He said that he said this on his blog, not to me in private. He said that he would have liked to have seen the first question be, why do you think your interpretation of Genesis is the correct interpretation? To me, that just reeks of the whole problem. In the first place, is the whole thing is subject to the discipline of philosophy called hermeneutics, these interpretive problems in texts. So, the whole thing is just so preposterous that giving it a stage, and I think it was one of the most viewed ever live streaming events CNN had ever had.
It was a lot.
Yeah, something amazing. I think you're giving something a platform that deserves no platform.
We thought it was kind of funny that Dan Arrow was literally the first thing mentioned.
I love that. I know, I love that. I thought, that's fantastic.
Dan was probably jumping up and down just to have started off the whole debate that way, whether or not he wanted it to happen or not.
Yeah, I've never met him. He's I like his work. I like what he does. He's a great guy.
So in the book, you talk a lot about doxastic openness and I guess we could say closedness. Could you explain doxastic belief and indeed even the word? What does it mean? Because it's a pretty esoteric word, and what does it mean for one's beliefs to be either doxastically open or doxastically closed?
Yeah, I reappropriated that from the literature. People talk about epistemic closure, coming from epistemology, the Greek, and people talk about doxastic logic. I use the word, and I mention this in the book, in a way that it doesn't have exactly jive with the way it's used in the philosophical literature. It just means a closed belief system, an open belief system. And part of the problem is that people have closed belief systems. Their beliefs are immune to any external they're immune to revision.
Is it immune, or are they just not exposed to it?
Well, that's a great question. The question is, do they lack the attitudinal disposition to make those changes, or are they cognitively incapable of making those changes? Do they have some brain condition that prevents them from happening? Or, again, the answer is complicated, like so many questions in life, and it doesn't lend itself to a single response. But so that's basically what it means, is that many of the faith, part of faith is it engenders and almost instantiates a type of closure with regard to beliefs. So people become closed with their own, people who have caught the faith virus become closed, and then they relish in the fact that they have closed beliefs. It's interesting, I've been reading some stuff online where people go through the pretense of pretending that they're open to ideas, but they're actually not open to ideas.
Do you have a greatest or your favorite street treatment story? So, the one that really stands out as either the biggest success or the hardest one or the biggest failure. Do you have one that just is in your mind as the best one, the one you remember the most?
It's funny, the ones that this is going to sound weird, but really the greatest successes are the ones that I don't even know about. Yeah. So I'll run into someone years later and they'll ask if I remember them, and I'm, as honest with people as I don't remember you, or maybe they look familiar. I'll say you look familiar, and they'll say, we had this conversation and it really got me thinking. And I tell you, I swear to you, for the life of me, I can't remember the conversation. So I don't think that there's any one story. People have, I can remember particular cases of people who have, and in The Reason Whisperer, there's a piece of this. That's the show in which I go into churches, temples, mosques, and synagogues and help people begin their own process of deconversion. There's a woman I ran into at my book signing who used to be a pretty hardcore Christian, and it's always incredibly rewarding. There wasn't any one intervention or one story or anything that was said, but it was this contact over a number of years in which she came to realize that she was harboring a faulty epistemology, and she's consequently shed her superstitious beliefs. Yeah, that's just an incredibly rewarding thing. And the other thing I want to say is, in regard to the Ken Ham debate or the Bill Nye, I think there's a kind of deep-seated pessimism within the free thought community, even though right now we seem to be quote-unquote winning, and superstition is, if you look at poll after poll of religiosity, etc. But I think that there's a kind of frustration and even an anger that some people will simply never change their minds. That is just not true. Not only is there no evidence for that, there's abundant evidence that people like Jerry DeWitt or John Loftus, these people who have been indoctrinated into communities, have had severe forms of doxastic closure, have been able to escape. So there's hope for everybody. There's hope for look, I was just in Canada, in Calgary, CFI, some of the best people ever, and Nate Phelps was there, right? The whole Westboro Baptist Church thing. So anybody and everybody has a possibility of living their lives free of delusion. We just have to help them facilitate that role.
Nate Phelps is a great guy. He was recently, he tweeted a picture of him holding a sign, and it said, I think it was at an LGBT support rally, and it said something along the lines of, when you force kids to hide in the closet, they run out of things to play with, and there's a noose, talking about suicide in the community. And I thought he's a great guy. I heard him speak at the Florida Humanist Convention back in November.
Yeah, he is a great guy. And look at the situation that he came out of, right?
The
that
worst.
was the
Maybe
most
the worst,
extreme, right? Yeah, no, absolutely. That was the most extreme. And I want listeners to think about this. If Nate Phelps can do that, then virtually anybody else, that's chump change. It is just simply not as hard, and they weren't as cemented in these communities that had the wrong values, or values that were just repugnant. So if he can do it, anybody can do it.
So we've got a question from a Twitter user, and I'm probably going to butcher this because I'm not sure. Some people don't camel case their usernames, so I don't know how to read them.
What does camel case mean?
So let's say you've got three words all smashed together. You capitalize the first letter of each word.
Oh, I see. Camel case. That's cool.
So it is C out, like the letter C out, love, the letter C in. C out, love C in. I don't know what that's supposed to say. But he or she asks, what's next for your critical thinking outreach? I recall you mentioning something about OHSU diabetic recovery groups.
Right. Yeah, so what's next? Wow, boy, what a question. What's next? Well, I have a game coming out. I have that's a game about critical thinking. It's how to think critically in a fun. No,
game?
it's a card game, and I partnered with these folks from Portland. It's a Portland artist. It's a Portland studio, Elbowfish. And I got to tell you, the game is fantastic. My wife played it. My kid played it. I don't really want to self-promote or sell anything, so
sure.
I'll answer the question. But I really do think it would be fun, and if it wasn't going to be fun, I wouldn't lend my name to it. And then I have a Kindle single, or at least 2 Kindle singles coming out. It's kind of like a field guide to a manual for creating atheists, more conversations based upon the chapters. I have the TV show, which is The Reason Whisperer, coming out, and I'm super excited about that. That's a massive, massive massive project. I have a chapter in a book about faith coming out in which it's Christianity is Not Great is the name of the book. It's a takeoff on Christopher Hitchens' God is Not Great.
Sure.
I have I have so much stuff. I have articles that I'm writing. I'm busy.
Is Critical Thinking Outreach a group you run, or is it just something that you do?
No, it's something I used to do a lot, but I will be very blunt with you. The state of Oregon has decided we live in a democracy, and it is what it is. If you don't like it, as I've told my students repeatedly, don't complain about it. Run for the legislature. They've decided to underfund the universities. So even though I wasn't making any money before from that, my hope would have been that I would have received an internal grant to help me bring critical thinking to the schools. One of my colleagues has picked that project up and is doing that now. But the fiscal environment, in fact, my kids go to public school in Portland, and the teachers are striking, which is going to be a problem. And then the Portland State University teachers are thinking about striking. I think they probably will strike, which in my opinion will be a complete catastrophe for everybody, students, administrators, and university. It'd be a catastrophe. Yeah. That we could do a whole show on the problems of education. And but by the end of that, if I don't have my job soon, I guarantee you, after you hear my thoughts on that, I'd be attacked by the union administration, by everybody. I wouldn't have a job. But sometimes people just need to speak, be forthright in their speech about what the problem is. But so I have a lot of things going on. The critical thinking outreach was something that I tried to do, and my hope was to get a mini grant to release me from a class or two so that I could really focus on it. We put the mechanism in place, and my colleague has dealt with it.
You talk a lot about false humility in the book, as well as an arrogance as a result of basically crappy epistemology, saying that faith immutably alters the starting conditions for inquiry by uprooting a hunger to know and sowing a warrantless confidence. And for me, this is the second worst thing about religious faith specifically. And I think everyone should recite your words, those words right there, every day when they wake up in the morning, or whenever they wake up. If it's not in the morning, some people sleep pretty late. To remember this harrowing fact that these people are claiming to know something they don't know, something that isn't true or likely isn't true, and that they're influencing the world that we live in negatively by doing so. So what can an army of street epistemologists do to stop this, and how can they do it?
Okay, hold on, way back up. So what's the first?
The first for me is basically that you can. So if you believe in God and you say, let's say you're an alcoholic or something, and you get through that and you're no longer an alcoholic, and you say something like, "Oh well, God got me through it." It seems like religion. The most damaging thing to me is that it takes away your ability to be proud of your accomplishments and to take pride in your accomplishments, take credit for them. But on the flip side, if you fuck up, it is all your fault. You're a piece of shit. You're a sinner. You're no good anyway. So you've got all the blame and none of the claims to success should you have success. And that bothers me a lot. That's the first most to me.
If you don't mind, so when did you realize that? Like, at what point in your life did these sorts of questions start coming to you?
I don't know if I remember a specific time. I remember the first time I ever thought about it in that way was probably about 3 years ago in Boynton Beach, Florida, which is a horrible town. And I don't remember what I saw, or what I think maybe I saw somebody in a hospital or maybe a treatment center or something. I can't remember where I was when I thought it, but I remember it was probably about 3 years ago, and I just thought that. I thought, what a sad thing that these people can say, well, I'm a horrible person. And that's the way I was born. So if I can get over that horribleness, then that's grace be to God. But if I can't, that's my fault.
Right. Yeah. Okay, so back to the question of why is it an arrogance? It's an arrogance because one thinks that one knows something. I mean, it's an arrogance because one places look, even if you don't think about it, faith as epistemology, and some Christians don't like that. I think they don't like it because, well, that's a separate discussion. But even if one wants to claim that the Spirit of God lives within the Holy Spirit, and they have confidence that that's true. All that does is just push the epistemology back one link in the epistemic chain. So it doesn't solve it. Then the Holy Spirit becomes faith by proxy, et cetera, et cetera. So the problem is that is incredibly arrogant to say that you know that those feelings that you have inside you are true and you just know it. It's incredibly arrogant to say that you know that the Bible is written by God. I mean, it's not even incredibly arrogant. It is an astonishing arrogance that is outside of human knowledge. And what that does is, kind of related to your first point, that shuts down one's sense of wonder. That prevents wonder from reemerging because one thinks that one has the answers already, or at least one thinks that one has stumbled upon or come across the right questions. So we need to be more humble about not only what it is that we claim to know, but how we claim to know. And, it's funny, some people will say to me things like, well, you have faith in the scientific method. Well, that's not true at all. I would jettison the scientific method in a heartbeat if there was something that came along that was more parsimonious and explanatory, et cetera. So it's not – faith is arrogance, and it's disguised as humility. It's false humility. It's not a genuine humility. It's not even humility. It's arrogance. But the narrative that it's been woven by the faithful and this idea of, he's a man of faith, he's a good man, he's a decent man, what's even more amazing about that is that people who don't have faith buy into that. So now I'll throw a curveball at you. You ready?
Go for it.
So I think I've come up, I don't know what you think about this, but I think this is the first time I voiced it. An argument for the existence of God. It's something like an atheist whatever the Latin would be for an atheist. I think I've come up with an argument for the existence of God that only an atheist could come up with. It came about as something I've been thinking about for a long time. It came about from the conversation I had with Dawkins, and it came about from – I read a little bit about it in the book. Okay, so what it's kind of a play on the defeasibility test. So what would make one a rational person believe in God? Okay, so in order to answer that question, let's rule out what it couldn't be. Well, it couldn't be any feeling state.
Right.
I could construct why that is now, but take me a few minutes. But basically, it couldn't be a feeling state because you could always be wrong about your feeling states. Mm-hmm. You'd have no way to there's no corrective mechanism. You'd have no way to independently adjudicate that. Different people have different feeling states that tell them different things. The Emperor of Japan is divine, or what have you. So it couldn't be a feeling state. Now, of course, that's not convincing enough for some people. Oh well, it's an argument for the existence of God. So that's the other thing, So when you ask people, well, how do you so look, these people have this feeling state that tell them that these things are true, and they're absolutely positive. They have the same confidence in their feeling states that their feeling states map onto reality that you have. So how do you what do you make of that? Okay, so let's just accept for this argument it can't be a feeling state. It also cannot be any sensation. So it couldn't be, the example I give in the book about Lawrence Krauss walking out and the stars are aligned to say, "I'm God, believe in me." Couldn't be that because you couldn't differentiate it from a delusion. You have to be able to rule out alternative causes and explanations like God. A great episode, by the way, in Star Trek: The Next Generation. I think it was with Deidre. Picard goes down to the planet. The woman can make the Earth move. She's an alien, but to the people who don't understand the technology, it seems like she actually is a god. But there could be some bizarre situation like that that's occurring that we don't know about. So it also couldn't be any piece of evidence. And just by the way, you'll notice the more I love the term sophisticated theologian coined by Jerry Coyne. The more sophisticated the theologian, the less they rely on evidence and the more they rely on arguments. Okay, and they know why. They know because any giving of evidence is itself sort of presuppositional. It just has presuppositions within it. Like you can't point to a physical artifact in the world or like a tomb or something and say, well, look, here's this tomb, therefore nothing. Therefore, you can't make any inferences from that. Okay, so it can't be any physical evidence. It can't be any sensation. What about an argument? Well, I mean, frankly, if we haven't figured it out now in 2,500 years thinking about this stuff, I mean, I'm open to what that could be, but I couldn't imagine that it could be an argument, because we certainly would have come up with it by now. So what does that leave? Okay. Well, let's say that you jump to this binary idea that there is a universe and there is a God, and God wants you to communicate with him because he wants to have a relationship with you. Now, you could say, well, why would you think that? Well, just let's play the make-believe game. We're just going to pretend that's true. Am I being clear so far?
Yeah, I got you. I'm on board.
Okay, cool. So God wants you to believe, but God, being all-knowing, knows that he can't make you believe in the basis of sensation. He can't make you believe, even if he gave everybody the sensation that there was God, that wouldn't be good enough, because you wouldn't have had to choose it. You wouldn't have chosen it. That's the Christian version. You know, studying the Quran now, the Quran has a different version of that. But anyway, you could leave the Abrahamic traditions to have yet another version of that. Okay, so the only thing that God could do, if there was a God and he wanted you to know there was a God, is to do nothing. He couldn't give you any evidence, any sensation, any argument. So this isn't an argument for theism. It's a bizarre argument for deism. That the argument for the existence of God basically boils down to there is no evidence, no argument, no sensation for the existence of God. Therefore, you should believe. Now, before you discount that out of hand of saying that's ridiculous, at least that argument is honest and it works, unlike the Kalam cosmological argument or Anselm's argument or Pascal's wager, all these things, which really don't do the work that the argument intends for them.
So basically, because God is all-knowing and all-powerful and knows there'd be no true way to convince you, if you were a critical thinker of any sorts, or really anybody at all, he would then do nothing. And because he does nothing, that is proof of the fact that he exists.
Yes, that's correct.
Ooh, that's really interesting. That's very curvy. I like that.
Yeah, I would like to. This is the first time I've revealed that argument here on your show.
An exclusive on the No Godcast.
That's right, the No Godcast, an exclusive. Who would have thought they would have come to the No Godcast for an argument for the existence of God?
Nobody would have guessed by the title.
Particularly from me.
Never. You're a theologian, I bet. So, last question comes from Twitter user 16-bit heretic, which is 16-bit heretic. And she asks, or possibly he, I guess I don't know, I'm curious if you've heard from anyone who was deconverted by a reader of your book.
If anyone was deconverted by a reader? Oh, as opposed to just the person who claims that they've deconverted other people?
Yes.
Let me think for that.
I think it'd be hard to know. They'd have to really go out of their way to reach out to you.
Yeah, I think you would seriously be shocked if I told the volume of email that I receive every day is just shocking. That's why I'm kind of going through this whole thing. It's a great question. I think that the answer is I have not heard from anyone who's been deconverted by a street epistemologist. I don't want to say that that's true until I'm positive, but I'm fairly confident that that's true. Nothing strikes me or sticks out at me at the moment when of that being the case. So I'm fairly confident that that's the case.
It'll happen.
I've heard from a lot of people who have written for the Kindle Single. You know, they've sent me their accounts of things, but again, I have no idea to know whether those are true or not.
Well, it's kind of interesting because I would think, based on the title of your book, I would maybe, as a believer, pick it up and say, oh, well, let's see if this will make an atheist out of me, even though it's not really a book about deconverting the reader. It's a book about deconverting, to allow the reader to deconvert. So I think I wonder, have you had anybody reach out to you and say, I read your book and was deconverted by your book, by reading it?
I read it. No. I've had a mountain of emails about questions. It depends what you mean by deconvert. I mean, I've certainly had people who have written to me and moved one notch on the trans-theoretical model. That's certainly be the case. I've never had anybody write to me that said I was a person of faith, and by the time I got to this end of the book, I tossed it out the window. So that hasn't happened. I actually had a woman, I think it was a woman, if memory serves me correctly. She said that reading my book gave her strength, renewed her commitment to God. If you would have asked me beforehand, I would have said that those in the pre-contemplative stage, and I was fairly confident about this, even though I didn't have that much evidence for it. I only had circumstantial evidence and anecdotal evidence that people in the pre-contemplative stage would react very viscerally to the book, and that would strengthen their state of doxastic closure. I knew that going into it, so I was fairly confident. But then people in the contemplative stage, it would move them one stage away from faith. So, I mean, it's really interesting when you think about that in aggregate, that you're releasing a book, and when people who really are pre-contemplative read the book, it worsens their epistemic situation. But when other people read the book, I mean, it's really an ethical question to a certain extent. They go from contemplative to they're ready to change.
You cannot know the future, so take action. Don't wait for things to happen. Don't pray. Don't have faith. Don't rely upon imagined entities. Act. Yeah. Motivating words from a prolific author, Peter Boghossian. Peter, thanks for sitting down with us tonight and answering my questions as well as questions from our listeners and audience. Stick around after the show and we'll talk a little more.
Thanks. It was a great chat, and I appreciate it very much.
That's all for episode 32 of the No Guidecast. I hope you enjoyed yourself, and I hope you have an excellent evening. Until next time, this is Tanner Campbell saying, have a good night, everyone. Bye-bye.
It's time to say goodbye, dear listener, but worry not. There are many ways to keep the No Godcast mojo flowing until next week. Check out nogodcast.com for past episodes, and while you're there, click on Ask Us to submit a question to the show. You can also check out upcoming interviews and get the latest No Godcast news from our blog. If you'd like your voice featured on our show, leave us a message on Skype. Username No Godcast. Well, this is it. Our last few seconds together. Spend it liking us on Facebook and following us on Twitter if you haven't already. See you next time. And remember, there is no God, there are no gods.